Today's episode of Dominaria's Judgment is brought to you by StarCityGames.com, where we have our weekly sale, or should I say our weekly promotion, for you over at StarCityGames.com/sale. And this week, until Monday, June the 21st at 10:59 a.m. Eastern, it's 10% off all promotional cards. So that's pre-release foils, judge foils, secret lair cards, game day promos, full art cards, those San Diego Comic-Con Planeswalkers that people were so excited to get their hands on a few years ago. 10% off all of that and so much more at StarCityGames.com/sale.
This week's Dominaria's Judgment is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel, the #1 store for Magic the Gathering inspired apparel. Take a look at their t-shirts, hoodies, stickers, and just general stylings at coalesceapparel.shop. Then use gift code SCG at checkout to save 10% on your entire order. And seriously, I want to emphasize that sticker part. Shirts are cool, but you can send a targeted message with a sticker. Slap it on your deck box if it matches your commander, or if you really want to get inventive, find a way to slap the 3x4 sticker on your 2.5x3.5 Magic card, maybe with a sleeve, maybe with a hard case. If you're inventive people, you'll find a way to make it work. So, take a look at coalesceapparel.shop, check out their product lines like Wooburg Forever and Ravnica University, and see what catches your eye. Remember, use gift code SCG at checkout to save 10%. Coalesce Apparel and Design. No one made what they wanted, so they made it themselves.
Hello everyone, welcome to episode 10 of Dominaria's Judgment, a weekly modern podcast brought to you by Star City Games. I'm Dom Harvey, I'm here with Ari Lax, and we have a truly bumper edition of a League decklist dump to go over this week. I believe one of the largest ones on record, if not the largest, in the wake of a set which some people, Ari, are calling Commander Horizons 2, because it's guaranteed to have no impact on this format whatsoever.
Absolutely not. None of the legendary creatures is at all going to make an impact, let alone any of the other cards.
Yeah, the thing that is so truly asinine about that whole discussion is last time, you could kind of understand it, where up front we were given Cabal Therapist, Sarah the Benevolent, if those names ring a bell to anyone, as these examples of cards which are the approximate power level of what we could expect from that set. Turns out the approximate power level was, several stratospheres beyond that. But you could understand with that introduction why people might keep their expectations low at the start. And then, we had Hogak smuggled in towards the end of the spoiler season. And so we didn't get the platinum hits right away. This time around, they just gave us the best card on day one. It was, okay, you want to know what to expect from this set? It's Urza Saga. Here you go. And so with that in mind, with only 10% of the set revealed or whatever, proclaiming this set to be just a damn squib, it seems truly... I don't know what you're hoping for there.
Wasn't Grief also just in the next 10 cards spoiled? They're just here's two cards right up front. They're broken. Good luck.
Also at that point, what are you even hoping for? Do you want this set to fail? Do you want Modern to be exactly the same as it was with Strixhaven, which was fine? I guess it was playable, but no one seemed too excited about it. Or do you want this set to actually blow the ceiling off the format, which it seems like this one well and truly has? It feels like there really was no winning with some of that crowd there.
Yeah, I think we can have that discussion in another... I think we clocked in MH1 after 2 years, so we'll come back to that in 2023 about whether this set was a good idea or not. But I think they made a concerted effort into... Well, you can see where they listen to Patrick Sullivan a lot and put the power into cards that cost mana and enter combat and take time, or are reactive free spells and not proactive free spells. But yeah, it was a lot of power still.
Yeah, I think when you know who some of the people were working on the set, you can start to see their fingerprints dotted around here. And with that in mind, it might be worth covering one of the Twitter topics of the week from recently, which was Sam Black talking about some of the behind-the-curtain inside scoop on their perspective, at least, on how the development process went down. And so... Sam was saying that Urza Saga was not really tested in what became its final form, at least to their knowledge. There may have been in other parts of the building some work being done at the lab there. But Sam received a little bit of blowback from that, and maybe some of it wasn't personal. Some of it was more a case of how could you let this card out the door without testing it? And this is eerily redolent of stuff like Skull Clamp or whatever, where you something gets changed at the 11th hour in the file and no one really pays it too much attention until you realize that you've just dropped this bomb on the format as the set is going to the printers. But we've had, especially from Sam, a lot of some of this behind the scenes information. And the more I hear about it, the more I am kind of confused that the set turned out as well as it did and hasn't been as broken as it seemed like it potentially could have been.
Well, it sounds like they tried to nip a lot of that in the bud. I believe the example that he used was that Scion of Draco was like a 9/9 or something, and not a 4/4, with basically the same text, which is a lot.
Yeah, really pushing that a question of how big does a vanilla creature need to be playable in modern day Magic, and maybe it would have had some other bells and whistles on it too. Caracas apparently was slated to be in the set at the start. Very glad that Sam was able to nip that one right in the bud, and just various other examples here where you wonder, is this a case of there is something wrong about this process that does need to change, or is it that just set design is intrinsically such a complicated process that something is going to have to give somewhere? And for a set whose remit is to push the envelope as far as humanly possible, the danger there is even more acute.
I think some of it is just that there is a very there's a 3-part overlap, right? To build this set, you need people who are like capable of building good and interesting Magic cards, people who understand Modern very well, and people who have like a knowledge of history of the game in like a very like deep way that isn't just like I played this deck 20 years ago. Like have like more of like a understanding of like the ecosystem and everything, so that you can produce cards like I don't want to say Urza Saga, but maybe like Umezawa's Charm from MH1. But anyways, and there's not a lot of those people. Sam Black's probably one of them, and Patrick Sullivan's probably another, and the list is kind of running dry. So yeah, it's you have however many people have to make the set, however many people have to test the set, and like making the set is multiple steps, and some people who are not as good at one of those different pillars are going to be involved in producing cards at one step. And it's on the QA team to make sure that Doomsday doesn't go out the door,
See, I don't know if this makes me part of the problem. I kind of wanted Doomsday to be in the set when I heard that, because absent all of the fast mana that you see in some of the older formats, it feels like that card is kind of slow, kind of hard to cast. You open yourself up to some forms of counterplay that might actually be kind of an interesting, unique play pattern to have in the format.
No.
Okay.
Street Wraith and Unearth and Thassa's Oracle, it would not be fun.
Yeah, the question might be, what exactly is the upside here? Like, either it is the Golgari Great Troll problem, right? Like, either it just takes the door clean off its hinges and you need to screw it back on somehow, or is it adding anything fun? Especially, probably not. And that's where some of the more puzzling cards that did or did not make it into the set, I don't know if when you played with Caracas back in 95 or Solitary Confinement back in 2002, I don't know if it was especially fun to play against those cards back then. So I don't know what would have changed with 20 years of refined design understanding there. But always fun to see those glimpses behind the curtain. And I think that while obviously people are going to have reactions to those, I think keep the feedback or the criticism directed where it's due, and not especially in Sam's case. Like, it feels like it creates perverse incentives to be criticizing Sam for actually being upfront about perceived mistakes that they made, that other people made. This is why we get that information to begin with, and what we don't want to happen is we never get the scoop here until it's far too late, until the next Modern Horizon 3 comes around and it's too late to learn any of those lessons in public.
Yeah, and the person whose job it was to test Urza Saga did post publicly on Twitter and say that they did test it, and it's I think that Urza Saga, especially, like, depending on how much time you have, it's very easy to just put it into Affinity and see that it's like a good Affinity card, and then be like, well, it's slow and not like obviously broken, and not build like the Golgari food deck or something along those lines, where you're creating this hybrid control combo nonsense issue or whatever.
Yeah, the marginal Urza Saga deck, which there are a lot of in this deck dump. So some of these four-color control decks that just have Urza Saga shoehorned into them, stuff like that. Hard to get to those when you have all of these other cards on the docket needing to be tested, and you have people breathing down your neck waiting for immediate feedback. So people are doing the best with the resources that they have, but maybe the lesson here is some of those resources need to be directed elsewhere, or that the process somewhere needs to change. Not tough to judge from our vantage point, but in any case, we do have some of the results of those design processes making themselves known in the challenges here in the league results as well. So let's start here by getting into the weekend challenge results, which last week it was a brave new world for Modern. We had no idea really how the format would be shaken up with the new set, and as I alluded to last week, there were some card availability issues which have persisted to an annoying degree this week, but have been alleviated a little bit. And also, people now have that frame of reference with the previous week's results to work on. And so, what you're seeing is maybe the first major informed iteration in this new format.
Yeah, it looks like people are aware of Urza Saga being the best card in the format now, even if they cannot digitally obtain them.
That sounds right to me. Yeah. So I guess we'll kick this off with the winning deck from Saturday. Not an Urza Saga deck. It is a classic with a new twist, which we're going to see a lot of with MH2. This is Blue White Stoneblade splashing for Ragavan. So just right out the gate, that is a bold statement about Ragavan's power, that you're willing to splash for this seemingly somewhat aggressive one drop in what you think of as this it's kind of a tempo deck, but it's more mid-rangey than, this isn't Soulscar Mage and Dragon's Rage Channeler now and Monastery Swiftspear. This is a kind of clunky-ish blue mid-range deck that decides smashing for a red Savannah Lions is the way to go.
Yeah, and it really is splashing for Ragavan. It's the other red cards, there's literally Lightning Bolt and Prismari Command in the sideboard. And I don't even like Lightning Bolt in Modern right now, to be honest. So it really looks like it's just Ragavan, which is kind of like I think that the statement's kind of being made here that you want a Azorius control deck that is as proactive as possible because you can't really predict what's going on. So you just got to beat some people heads up. And that's, you have Ragavan and Stoneforge Mystic to kind of exploit that. Stoneforge being able to go over some medium amount of creatures with Batterskull and Cauldron Complete. Ragavan being able to beat up on creatureless opponents just by giving your control deck a million mana. And then if your opponent is not, something creatureless that you can would need to exploit, or something that has creatures that lose to Batterskull, you're probably going to beat them with Archmage's Charm and countering their spells. So you got all the angles covered.
The other red card of sorts in this deck is Prismatic Ending, which we see pop up more and more as people realize just how versatile that card is. And that may be the other story of this deck list is in a format where people are going to be trying all these new things and you don't know exactly what you have to answer. Being proactive is good, but having these broad answers is also good. And so in this deck list, you see 3 Prismatic Ending, 4 Counterspell, 4 Archmage's Charm, 3 Force Negation, and 3 Cryptic Commands. So this deck can establish that early threat, whether it's Stoneforge Mystic or now Ragavan, and then just turtle up behind this wall of counter magic, get some continuous advantage turn by turn. But then between Archmage's Charm in particular, Prismatic Ending, and so on, if something does slip through the cracks, it's actually not all that difficult to answer either.
No, the same blue control suite that we've seen for the last, how long was Mystic Sanctuary around for? However long now.
Far too long, yeah.
Yeah, it's the same stuff. The thing that is kind of interesting to me is that, well, you talked about being able to cover basically everything. This deck doesn't really have a great answer to an opposing Urza Saga. Is your plan to Archmage's Charm a token and then not have artifacts? I don't really know what your game one plan is against Urza Saga.
Yeah, that is one of the missing links, actually. And I argued before that Urza Saga was what might be keeping these new interactive pieces in check somewhat, where, it is tough to invest so many resources in Grief plus Ephemerate, insofar as you are investing that many to begin with, when you just miss Urza Saga, or how viable is it to play this draw-go kind of game when Urza Saga just lets them do that better than you? And so, yeah, that is the one glaring omission here. And we have seen other lists that we'll get to, some of shortly where people are main decking these naturalized or disenchant effects, and it would not surprise me to see this list as it becomes more refined. Maybe you find a copy of Wear Tear, for example, which I think is an excellent card right now, sneaking into some of these main decks.
Yeah, and I guess it is worth noting. I do remember looking at this. This deck did not play against Urza Saga in the top 8. Is my
Okay.
recollection of that bracket as displayed by Magic Online, which may or may not be correct. So it's very possible that it kind of made its way through without needing to play that effect, play against that effect too often.
Yeah, and we saw Gabriel Nassif pick up this deck and pilot it in the Sunday Challenge to a top 16 finish, I believe. And at a glance here, just scrolling through this list, it looks like it's not exactly the same 75 cards, but it is basically identical with the sideboard cleaned up a bit or reflecting some of those Saturday results. But it looks like this is a good template to build on if you're interested in this kind of strategy.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Like the sideboard cleanups that Nassif had on Sunday do look really nice. I do like moving from subtlety to ether gust, just because your threats are so cheap. I don't think you're like tapping out and trying to really defend against a big play in a time frame where subtlety is a really great exchange. Um, and I like just throwing a Kozilek in the sideboard because, again, I guess this is another reaction to Saturday, right? Because I guess
Yeah,
we'll get to
where
that, but yes, it is a
in just a
reaction.
second. Yeah. The one other card that Nassif did add here was Fire Ice, which I think you're going to be seeing a lot of in Modern as people who weren't playing Magic over 20 years ago discover that card's power for the first time. But especially in a deck that does want to be quite flexible in what role it takes in the game. Sometimes this is deal one to your ignoble hierarch and also shoot down something else. But very often this is tap your Urza's Tower to effectively time walk you by me another turn. It's get a blocker out of the way so the Ragavan can connect. It's taking the shields down by tapping your land that's holding up a removal spell, so then that clears the way for Stoneforge Mystic or Jace the Mind Sculptor or something else. So truly an incredibly flexible card. And when you have all of these different instant speed interactive cards, in conjunction with Snapcaster Mage as well, it is so difficult to play around all of that effectively at the same time. And so, especially against a control player of Massif's caliber, that's just a nightmare situation.
Yeah. Also, this deck has a Force of Negation as a free spell, which really adds to that kind of complication. Also notable with Fire Ice, it pitches to Force of Negation, so like having a
Yes.
removal spell that does that is good stuff. Just you really have a
Also,
lot of flexibility every turn with the decisions you make with this deck.
yeah, also pitches to the one copy of Fury that we see in Nassif's sideboard. And typically, you think of these incarnations as you really need to have a high density of cards in that color to pitch. And there are, I guess, redundant Ragavans, for Lightning Bolt or Fire Ice. There are not that many red cards in this entire 75. So maybe Nassif is fine just casting that card for 5 mana a lot of the time. And Fury is maybe the best one to be doing that with.
Well, you're supposed to dash the Ragavan and then pick it back up, and then you have the
I
Fury
see.
there. That's how that works.
A combination, yeah.
Yes.
We also, in the sideboard here for Nassif, we see 2 copies of Rest in Peace and 2 copies of Stony Silence. And this is almost a window back into like 2014 Modern, where every white deck that could justify it would begin their sideboard with some number of those 2 cards. And being able to deploy those effectively was a good argument to be in one of those decks. Often, when Boggles was popular, it wasn't that Boggles itself maybe was the best positioned deck. It was getting rewarded for wanting to play Rest in Peace and Stony Silence was a great place to be. And that's why I think as we might touch on Enchantress later, and I'll be writing about Enchantress in my article on SG this week. To me, that's almost one of the incentives is finding a good reason to play these super weapon hate cards in your sideboard.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that neither of these is as much of like a stone cold deck killer as it was back in the day, but they shut off like 60% of a deck, and you try to just lean on the rest of your deck to deal with the rest.
Yeah, Stony Silence still lights out against the literal affinity deck with a bunch of artifact lands. But yeah, Rest in Peace against the food decks, for example, not as effective as it would be against Dredge back in the day, or I guess now as well. Still a very good card. And if you can just reduce their deck to, let's say, 50, 60% capacity, you can rely on just your normal, good, fair game plan to do the rest.
Yeah, and again, a lot of that is because of the additions of the blue cards from the original Modern Horizons that have actually brought the rest of the deck up to the power level. So it's not just like a stacks deck with Supreme Verdicts.
Yeah, so that Kozilek, as you mentioned, a response to Mill getting second and fourth in Saturday's challenge, and it's also been quite consistently 4-0ing the daily prelims as well. So this deck is here to stay and has not really gained anything specific from Modern Horizons 2. Maybe getting something in the D&D set, which I guess we'll come to that in due course when previews for that officially start rolling in, although it feels like it's only been a matter of days since we had Modern Horizons 2 to digest. But this deck, I think, is very well positioned in the format at the moment where, Amulet Titan may be the deck with the most raw power, and this lines up very well against any kind of big mana strategy. And then the Cascade decks where their whole game plan, the whole joke is to cascade into one card consistently and just mill plus surgical extraction is shockingly effective against that game plan too. And in the bigger picture, if your deck is named after a card, there is a good chance that you have a glaring weakness to mill in general.
Yeah. It's interesting that you said nothing really big added to this deck because Fractured Sanity is actually just not that big of an addition. 3 mana mill 14 is just like a nice to have.
Right, and it's almost like a nice problem to have that a card like that does not really make an impact anymore because you have so many other good tools to deploy now. And one other thing you see here is Glimpse the Unthinkable has made its way out of these deck lists for the most part. And that's a card which, just on raw rate, it's in the fourth place list here, but not in the second place list. That's a card which, if to use the blue burn analog, this is your Boros Charm, right? This is your card that deals this giant chunk of damage. And I guess that makes Archive Trap your Fire Blast in this analogy. But there are so many good options available to you now that you just don't really need that card anymore. And that's, yeah, we have a lot of new toys for Mill just being dripped into the format over the years, and now it's really reached this critical mass point. It looks like.
Yeah, and I think you were talking about like it as Boros Charm. I think it's important to think about this deck in the terms of being a Delver deck that's headed by Hedron Crab and Rune Crab, and you do have your Fire Blast and Archive Trap, but there's a limit to how much direct burn you even want in a deck that is sort of a Delver deck. This if you compare this to like the pseudo Delver decks that we're starting to see now with Luris and Dragon Raid Channeler, you can start like drawing the comparisons to like, would I actually want to put Flame Rift in my deck? Then why is Glimpse the Unthinkable in my deck here? And that's kind of like why these don't really make that big of a difference. It's just like, well, I'm playing Fractured Sanity because it's 3 mana deal effectively 6 damage or something, but like, that doesn't really get me to lethal if my Hedron Crabs and stuff aren't sticking.
Yeah, I think one thing that also is allowing this to happen is some of these pure linear decks or these hyper aggressive decks like Burn or Prowess, which don't have a single card that they rely on to such a degree that you can tear their deck apart with a surgical extraction, but which also are going to outrace all but your fastest draws. Those decks have not really popped up in the format so far, and I expect as people figure out how to build around Dragon Rage Channeler, for example, that very well could change. But for now, if your obvious weak matchups have mostly disappeared, and also the decks that people are excited about have this fundamental structural weakness to what you're doing, then that is a perfect opportunity for Mill to sweep in and just clean everything up.
Yeah. If everyone forgets their Gaia's Blessings at home, and people are playing decks that are vulnerable to just like an opposing linear strategy that just doesn't care about their stuff and has some amount of interaction, that's where Mill's going to succeed.
Yeah, and it may be the case that by the time you become aware that Mill is doing well again because it popped up in these challenge results, it's already too late to capitalize on that by picking it up yourself because you can expect to face a lot more Gaia's Blessings and Kozileks and so on in sideboards the following week. And that creates this weird dynamic that's exclusive to Mill, where for the most part, if you think a deck is going to be maybe 8% instead of 5% of the format the next week, it usually does not move the needle in terms of, do I want to have the full core Firewalker, let's say, instead of the third core Firewalker. Whereas with Mill, just using that one slot on one of these reshuffle effects does actually add a substantial amount to your win percentage there. And so you have this sub game going on in the corner of, well, maybe one of my sideboard slots is spoken for with a companion, is another one spoken for by whatever reshuffle effect I decide to put in my deck for that weekend.
Yeah. And if you're the mill player and really wanting to battle through, I suggest you start looking at whether you want Ashiok's or Soul Guide Lanterns. Ashiok is I think, slightly more impressive card if your opponent's decks aren't pressuring it in terms of just being able to bring it in and have it be a functional card. But Soul Guide Lantern isn't terrible.
I'm a little surprised we haven't seen any copies of Subtlety in these deck lists yet.
Well, I think some of that has to do with how good Luris is.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
That makes...
And when you're boarding an Ashiok, you do lose access to that. But I do like the Subtlety plus Mill combo. We're going to see that. I think I made a brief note of it in the league results that I don't mind just spoiling up here. But there was a tempo deck of some sort that was using Subtlety plus Thought Scour, I believe, alongside Murktide Regent. And that seemed like a pretty sweet setup there.
Yeah, love that whole package. And I think, yeah, I overlooked the Luris clash there, and that honestly may be the vast majority of the explanation. I do wonder if there is an argument for, in matchups where you don't think you're going to have time to pick up and play your Luris, or you just don't need to because none of your stuff is dying anyway, then having that free effect, because those matchups tend to be ones where you don't care what they're doing, they don't care what you're doing, they're just trying to execute their game plan as fast as possible, and having a free way to mess with that actually can really swing those races in your favor.
Yeah, I guess the other issue is that because you are, to some degree, I did say you're not truly a burn deck, but you do have burn spells, your card count does tend to matter more.
Yeah, that's true as well. So various factors are preventing Subtlety from, taking its obvious role in that deck, but as you mentioned, we'll see it popping up extensively elsewhere. Let's talk about this third place deck, because Claudio, fresh off a semifinals appearance last week, ran it back here with the same deck in Black-Green Yawgmoth. So this is a deck which, it was doing decently well before MH2. It picked up some good tools there between Gris and Ignoble Hierarch, and then we have some copies of Endurance here in the sideboard as well. I tried this deck out myself, and I wanted it to be better than it was. And in particular, I see these lists having 20 lands that aren't Dryad Arbor, and people are like even working a Carney Garden in there and so on. I have no idea how these people are casting their spells, because I found that even with the 22 land plus Arbor setup that you advocated for with Strixhaven, I was still just getting mana screwed constantly, or having these draws where if my Wall of Roots died, then my my chances of winning the game were going to die with it. And it felt like that was a much more common fail case for the deck than the games where you flood out and don't really have anything going on.
I have a different issue with this deck right now, but I think we'll get to that with the Sunday Challenge results. Because I don't really want to be playing anything structured like this anytime soon.
Okay, so make a mental note of that, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. And then closing out the top 8 here from Saturday, we have 2 copies of Amulet Titan here in 5th and 6th. And these are going back and forth on the age-old Arboreal Grazer versus Secure Tribe Scout question. And then we've seen, mostly in the prelims this week, people exploring Come the Great Creator again, which I think makes a lot of sense in a world of food decks with Underworld Cookbook and Asmore and so on, and where just having that extra threat density, or that threat that kind of fills in the holes that a Primeval Titan can't always clear up, that makes a lot of sense to me. But this core, the fundamental 54, 55 cards, and then whatever you decide to fill it out with, one of the decks to beat in the format yet again, and expect to be seeing a lot of this deck for some time to come.
Yeah, I mentioned in my article this week about Urza Saga that you shouldn't be playing turn 1 Urza Saga. This deck is one of the exceptions for multiple reasons, and that's one of the things it does best. I think one of the strongest arguments for Arboreal Grazer that I didn't think about at the time is that you can turn 1 play a green source, Arboreal Grazer, drop an Urza Saga, and then turn 2 start constructing. And also just like you play turn 1 Urza Saga to find an Amulet of Vigor on turn 3 and go off. So this deck is really abusing the, again, best card in the format beyond what it already can do.
Yeah, Scout does open up those turn to Saga and Construct lines where you vial it in, so to speak, on your upkeep, and then it's going to trigger in your main phase. So whichever one of those one drops you want to play still works beautifully with Urza Saga. But yeah, that card has been a real shot in the leg for this deck too, and it's yeah, a deck like Amina Titan usually is looking for very specific and very different things during spoiler season, and so you know. Strixhaven spoiler season was quite barren for most decks in modern, quite frankly. But for a deck like Amulet, most of the time maybe there's one or two cards which you try because they're green in your Sunless Pack deck, so you may as well put them through their paces. But for the most part, you kind of check out until some new card is given to you. This time, the obvious hallmark best card in the set also happens to be really the best thing that Amulet could ask for at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so many like lands or efficient ramp cards. Like, there's not a lot of categories this deck wants, um, and that's why I guess I, whenever someone says Karn the Great created this deck, I'm skeptical. But again, I'm gonna push it off. But I think now is the time to be doing that for sure.
Yeah. So let's see what else we have here. So moving down, finishing out this top eight, we have Niftalite. So we saw a 60 card version, kind of cleaned up a bit, relying on General Ferris Okurich doing well last week, and that basic template showing up here again. And if you look at the sideboard here, I like what's going on, where this player, the Big Moog, not faffing around with a bunch of multicolored cards so that we get maximum value off our general, off our Niv, and so on. We want the cheap hammers that are going to fix the holes in this deck. So 3 Chalice of the Void against all of the various Cascade decks running around, and maybe you could board it in against some of the Shadow or Prowess variants too. 4 copies of Veil of Summer. So a bold claim about that card's importance in the format. And then, we have one Unmod Ego in the main deck, and sometimes that is your most important card in the matchup. We've got 2 more copies of those to shore up that weakness too. So I like that this player is kind of admitting that their deck is a little clunky, a little bit ambitious sometimes, and we are finding ways to address that issue in whatever way is applicable to the matchup.
Yeah, my only addition to any of that is that I think that you should be reconsidering your 2-drop removal suite. There has to be something that kills an Urza Saga, and you probably should have some of those in the deck.
Yeah, was it Fracture, the one from Strixhaven, which I want to say that was Artifact Enchantment or Planeswalker, but it's kind of funny that wasn't the best removal spell with this exact mana cost in the same set, and so it went mostly overshadowed. But we may be moving to a point in the format where that specific combination of targets actually is more important now.
Yeah, and that seems like an improvement on Wear Tear for this deck, that it can actually cast. Though I guess you may want to switch it up so that your card doesn't overlap with Kaya's Guile, but that's all like fiddly, like select your random 2-drop spell that says destroy target A or destroy target B from over the last 20 years. So that's really all I have to say about this deck. I like where it's positioned moving forward though. So I would give this deck a little more credit next week.
Yeah, and then rounding out this top 8 here in 8th place, we have the black-green food list with Asmo and so on that Jerry Thompson wrote about and recommended in his article. And this is, I think, basically a card-for-card copy of that here. So I like a lot of what's going on. And I think we'll save a wider discussion of how to build these food decks and the various different ways to hybridize them with other things and so on for the next segment here. But worth noting that those decks have, kept delivering on that initial week 1 hype.
Yeah, no, this deck is just fundamentally really good, and also the kind of new exciting thing that people would gravitate to. So it's not surprising that it has ended up both being very popular and very good.
Did anything else from Saturday catch your eye here?
Let's see. There was a lot going on this Saturday. Well, I guess it's unfair to double count, so we'll wait till Sunday on that one. I want to talk about Aspiring Spike's deck that he finished in 17th place with, because that was like, watching his stream was the first time I felt like I really understood Dragon's Rage Channeler, and that card is absurd. It is.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that a lot of people got caught on this, like, oh, it's a graveyard threat and it's just a 3/3 and it's not going to be attacking on turn 2. It's like, no, no, no. This card just surveils whenever you take a game action. It's just like, oh, every turn I'm going to draw a good card for the rest of the game. Sometimes I'm going to cast Serum Visions and surveil, then draw a card and then scry, and everything will be great forever. Like, I think that it becoming a 3/3 is the secondary aspect of the card. So, yeah, that card is really absurd.
Yeah, it's a card which you just plant out on the first turn. It gives you this continuous form of filtering and smoothing where you counterspell their 2-drop, and now you surveil one as part of that equation, or you play expressive iteration on turn 3, and then the surveil helps you to maximize what you get off the iteration at the same time. So it just adds this such an important rider to all of your spells. And then, oh, by the way, you get to turn 3, turn 4, and something like this is attacking you for 3 in the air, and you have to remove this, or you're just going to die in a few turns of this, and maybe a Sprite Dragon, or that classic combination of Bolt into Snapcaster Bolt, which has defined Modern since its inception, really.
Yeah, it really it is everything that Delver Secrets wanted to be in the format.
Yeah, and we may well see decks that have your Delver and Dragon's Rage Channeler, or maybe that full complement of 1-drops that we see in Legacy Delver, just crushing that format at the moment. In some kind of dedicated is a Delver deck, but this is showing that you can get some of that closing speed that Delver promises you without having to warp your deck around Delver, which was always the issue here before.
Yeah, and let's see. The other deck I think I want to point out is the very typical Cryptic Command Lurrus of the Dream Den Red and 6 deck. That is,
oh, of course.
Yeah, the 12th place. Charlie the Banana King. Yeah. Oh, Urza Saga. Sorry.
Yeah, we skipped over the 4 colorless lands in this mana base as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you have 4 Urza Saga, 2 Reflecting Pool, everything is great. I don't even know where to start with this deck.
This is I mentioned this player is Julian Fleury, who is well known for being a mad scientist, and this certainly bears his signature. So a few things I like about this deck. Firstly, look at this split of Urza Saga targets. We have 4 Mishra's Bauble, okay, fair enough, 2 Pithing Needle, 1 Sargite Lantern, and then we have 1 Mox Amber to go with our 2 Jace Prodigy, 4 Red and 6, 1 Lurrus. We have 2 Brainstone, 1 Chromatic Spirit and 1 Chromatic Star. I don't know what the different use cases where you want one of those and not the other are. I guess against an opponent who has stuff like Leyline of the Void, Chromatic Spirit actually is better, but then against like Wear and Tear or whatever, it's better to have Chromatic Star, so maybe that split actually makes sense and I'm just not on their level.
Oh, there's Nature's Claim in the main deck. So you can get your Star and then Nature's Claim. Yeah, that's the big brain.
That's hard. I assumed that was just a heads-up response to Urza Saga being everywhere and artifacts being super popular in the format, but I missed the interaction with your own cards. So, yeah, we're really just missing all the angles here.
Yeah, I think if it doesn't do it justice to just read the list of cards. I think you just have to look at this and try to process it over time.
How do you feel about the 1 Sphinx's Revelation in the sideboard?
Yeah, that broke me. That was that's the dot over the eye.
Yeah, that's where it goes from being just a collection of cards to performance art, where you have to think there's some larger scheme or bit being executed here. Just play a Fatal Fiction or something if you really want that kind of effect, but have to salute Julian for continuing to do some great work and make our Nonsense of the Week segments always have some good material.
Yeah, the fact that this wasn't the Nonsense of the Week may have been an oversight, but it's okay. There's more. Don't worry. There's more.
Yeah, all of you really came through for us this time around. So I think that's going to do it for Saturday's challenge, and we'll be back with Sundays after a short break. Don't go anywhere.
If you are looking to sell your Magic the Gathering cards, it's never been easier than with StarCityGames.com. Make the best of our 30% store credit bonus and the fastest turnaround time in the industry when you use any of our 4 simple ways to sell located at StarCityGames.com/sell. You can check out our buy list, box up your cards and send them our way with the Ship and Sell program. Come on in to the Star City Games Center in Roanoke, Virginia for that personal touch, Or if you have everything, 500,000 cards, you want to store and you want to do some bulk, we'll come to you. And seriously, when we're talking about these large collections, Star City does mean they will come to you. The list of places goes from Ohio to New Jersey and elsewhere. Like, seriously, I've driven from Ohio to New Jersey. That is not a short drive. So head on over to starcitygames.com/sell, that's SELL, for more details on all these great options and maybe clear up a little space in your life for your next project, even if that happens to just be even more Magic cards or another Commander deck.
Okay, and we are back to cover the results from the Sunday Modern Challenge and hopefully make better time in the process here because there is a lot to get to once we move out of the challenges and into the leagues. So some quick hits from the top 8 on Sunday. We have Heliod and Paris both in the top 8, so nature is healing. We are back to normalcy again. And maybe a sign that those decks still have what it takes to compete in the format. They aren't the top dogs anymore. They aren't oppressive. But if you still have your Heliod deck waiting to be undusted in paper, then that's still going to be a good investment and some form of prowess, especially as we figure out the right home for Dragon Race Channeler is sure to be a good deck as well.
I think the other thing is that a lot of the level 0 decks we saw the first week were actually just like crushing these decks on power level. But as people move back to things that beat those decks, there's room for Izzet Prowess to be, slightly worse than the absolute best that the food deck has to offer, but still really good and not the deck that people are attacking. So no run-of-fouls, and it kind of gets to go and have its day in the sun.
And many of these decks cannot really beat Infinite Life that easily anymore either. So the food decks, some of the other decks that people are getting most excited about now, the core strategy of Heliod actually is still mostly sound there.
Yeah, and a lot of like the stuff that people were like specifically targeting towards Heliod, like Deicide, is gone, and you have cards that say Destroy Again. The Tempest of Lights and Force of Negation or Force of Vigors of the world.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, usually you see the kind of heavy duty artifact hate in the format. So, Shadowstorm, Collector Oof, Kataki now is popping up increasingly, whatever it is. And very occasionally you see stuff like, Back to Nature or whatever, if something like Boggles has just done well recently. But the actual specific cards that answer Heliod still aren't really being played that much in the format now. So that card is as obnoxiously difficult to kill as it ever was, really.
Yep. Indestructible Enchantment, just really out there for a card type.
Yeah. So going down the list, and then we'll go back up to the top just at the end here. We have Black-Green Food in third here, and this is what I'm going to call Doomwake's take on the deck. I don't know if this is his list or if this is the list that he has kind of been iterating on that he got elsewhere. So trying to give credit there where it's due, but this I think is the stock-ish list at this point, and this is compared to the approach that Jerry took with the heavy focus on Trail of Crumbs and so on, this list has more access to Asmo via Finale of Devastation, which is a really nice find for this deck, where because Asmo technically does not have a mana cost, and that's why you have to jump through these hoops to cast it, just casting Finale for GG for 2 mana can actually find Asmo. And so that gives you redundancy on your core engine piece, and then Asmo, of course, it comes in and finds the cookbook to get everything else going there. One thing I do like here is this deck has the finales, but doesn't try to add this finale toolbox where realistically you're never actually going to use these cards and they just dilute the deck and make it less coherent. But it's this safety blanket where you can tell yourself that if you get to 5 mana, you can finale for that Reclamation Sage to kill a leyline or something. But how often is that actually going to come up in practice?
Not very, and there's not even a Dryad Arbor to find. Like, it's just the full-on respect of I'm paying green and finding my legend because it is what my deck does.
Yeah. So I like the discipline there, like this take on the deck, and we'll discuss the relative merits of those different builds before too long here. Rounding out this top 8, though, is the champion, of course, which I know you had some strong thoughts on here.
Yeah, so the deck that won this challenge is 19 land Singleton Bant. This is the player's ID is CFTSOC3, and they actually had a top 32, top 16 finish in the previous challenge on Saturday with this deck. And it's basically just like 4 Eternal Witness, 4 Ephemerate, 4 Eldamari's Call, and cards. So I played this deck because I just saw it and it won. I'm like, you got to know. Like, you just got to know. Um, I think there are a lot of smart things occurring here. So the first thing this is what I've been putting off. Ephemerate plus Solitude is literally just a pillar of the format right now. There were 2 other Ephemerate plus Solitude decks in this top 8. And that is the reason I just don't want to be playing anything creature centric for the near future. I do not want to be engaging in that kind of combat against, like, I control 2 good creatures. Oh, great. You control nothing. It's over. It's really, really bad.
Strangleroot guys against Solitude is not a fair fight, and certainly not a fight I want to engage with anytime soon.
No, and a lot of my just like thoughts this week are like, what should I play that doesn't contain any creatures? And that's really what I've been thinking about. The other thing that I think this deck really does right is playing 19 lands, 3 Abundant Harvest is actually just like super smart. I never really flooded out when I played this deck, or flooded out or had mana issues. Like, I think that Abundant Harvest is best to think about. And if your deck is pretty good at making turn 1 green, which this deck is, even though it plays 1 Noble Hierarch, there's just one. Before that breaks my brain, back to the main topic. Abundant Harvest is a lot closer to like a Triome that cycles for 1 instead of 3 and always hits a spell when it cycles. It is just like a really good land replacement in a way that we just don't have in Modern. If you like, when you keep a hand with like Serum Visions in 1 land, like there's these issues where it doesn't work out, or like you can't scry into another Serum Visions. Like, when you just keep 1 land Abundant Harvest, it just happens. Like, you're just gonna like hit your 3rd land so often off of these like land light decks, but like you just have Abundant Harvest and it's all fine. So I think people should be exploring that more in a lot of other shells. I think Jund Death Shadow is the most obvious, but yeah, that's the good part. The bad part, I think, is that this deck takes no game actions before turn 3. Usually, it's really bad. Don't do that. I guess Ether Vial plus all these creatures is great, and more decks should sort of look like that. But like, even then, Ether Vial still is not really a game action until turn 4.
Yeah, there are ways to patch that up, and do we really need 4 Eternal Witness here? Can we work in some more, 1 mana, 2 mana creatures as a good violin? Possibly. And that's the first task, I think, for refining this deck and making it even stronger. But the way that CFT Sock explained some of the deck building here to me was with some of the traditional Soul Herder Blink decks, where you have all of these Wall of Omens and these Icebank Rattles and so on, those kind of have to take the spots of spells because you can't rely on those to hit your land drops. But when so many of your spells just replace themselves with a random card without really doing anything in their own right, it's so easy to flood out at that point. And so having this very land-light setup that nonetheless has Abundant Harvest to help kind of virtually fix your land count while also guaranteeing gas in the mid-game is a good way to square that circle.
Yep. Yeah, that all makes sense. I would just take the curve of this deck and move it to the left by a lot.
And CFT Stock, one of the pioneers of the Obosh Team Adventures deck in Standard, and I think the innovator of the Unleashed Fury Goldspan Dragon Naya Adventures deck in Coldheim Standard too. So someone who has a track record of succeeding with decks that are off the beaten path but quickly become one of the mainstays of the format. So a good pedigree to follow there. And I like a lot of what is going on in the shell. So we mentioned Meddling Mage as one of the fixtures of the week 1 blue-white Taxis deck, or the blue-white Ephemerate deck that won the challenge there. And so here you have Meddling Mage, and you also have 4 Illidan's School for Meddling Mage too. And likewise, Solitude plus Ephemerate is so obnoxious for any kind of creature deck to have to fight through. We only have 2 copies of Solitude, maybe that's something that needs looking at, but we have 4 Illidan's School, so we have more consistent access to that. And I think just that idea of being an Illidan's School toolbox deck that doesn't get too cute with it, I think that's a very solid foundation to build on.
Yeah. And I think Eternal Witness is another piece of that, because it's the same kind of thing where, yeah, you'd think this is a clunky card and yeah, you don't have a lot of spells. But once you're down this road of converting Call to Solitude and then converting Eternal Witness to another Solitude, like you really start adding up the destroying all your opponent's creatures. This deck is really, really good when your opponent is just like, I'm going to put a creature on the battlefield. and then you kill it, and then they just do another thing that's putting a creature down, and then you kill it. It's really bad when your opponent is like Hedron Crab mill you, and you're like, I can exile that and then die to mill.
Yeah, Urza's Tower. I hate to see that. So anything that's going outside the kind of the fair boundaries of the format is going to line up well against this in all likelihood. But if you're trying to go, Thoughtseize into Tarmogoyf after all this time, then this is going to be yet another nightmare matchup for you in all likelihood.
Yeah. I think, like I said, some good fundamentals, and I'm looking a lot at the other Solitude decks from this top 8, like the 80 card Kiki Jiki deck with Omnath and things like that.
Karusu, yes. So this is someone who you can guarantee will show up in basically every decklist dump with some collection of 80 cards. And there are some mainstays there, but they also do like to mix it up a bit. And there are so many directions that you can take that basic core that you would think one of them should be good, but then you don't know how much of it is being obscured by all of this other stuff that's going on here. But I like the focus on, again, 4 Solitude, 3 Ephemerate, could hopefully find room for the 4th somewhere if I was starting here. Have no idea what's going on with 2 Wall of Blossoms, 2 Wall of Omens in my Solitude deck. I guess Wall of Blossoms pitches to the sideboard Endurance, and Wall of Omens pitches to the Solitude, so I guess we've mapped out the numbers there exactly.
Wall of Blossoms taps to make green mana for Court of Calling. You gotta mix it up. It's called mana fixing.
Sure. Yeah, again, maybe this is a case of they are on a level that I simply cannot aspire to reach.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer. I think things are being tried.
Either way, the fact that you can basically take that core of Ephemerate and Solitude and then generic value creatures and put whatever the hell you want on top of that is a sign that that package is here to stay and definitely something to build around for the future.
Yeah, I really do honestly believe it is a pillar of the format, and it is going to take a bit for people to adjust, and I'm just trying to get ahead of that.
Yeah, so that was most of the interesting stuff from the top 8 here. Anything else from lower down that caught your fancy?
Yeah, I hate to say it, I like the Ad Nauseum deck, but
what? Wait, what? Why?
I think Profane Tutor is kind of nice, and it's a deck without creatures. That's it. I don't want to play creatures. This deck doesn't really have creatures. You probably should play some Gemstone Caverns in the deck. That's all I got.
Yeah, it is very unfortunate that it seems like all of the Solitude Ephemerate decks all have Meddling Mage now as well, so you kind of hate to see that. Or they have a Grief in Ephemerate, which really does a number on your A plus B plus C combo deck we've got going on here.
Yeah, if people move to Grief, this deck is right back in the garbage. But so far, that has been a league kind of thing and not a challenge kind of thing. And the instant it breaks through, I'd be done with it. But I'm giving it some time.
There is a Grief plus Ephemerate deck, actually just below this here, in the standings here. Orzhov Stoneblade with Stoneforge Mystic, Charming Prince, really leaning into some of these Flicker synergies. And we have 4 Ephemerate, 4 Malika Rebirth, and 3 copies of Undying Evil with 2 Persist. So if you draw one of your Evoke creatures, you're off to the races. But I actually wonder if this is too many of that effect, and that sometimes you're going to draw a hand of these your Undying Evils and Persist that don't really have good things to do with them, and just effectively have mulliganed at least once. Malika Rebirth does hedge your bets there a little bit because it is just part of your mana base. But yeah, that would be, if I was adjusting the numbers here, that would be one of the first places I would look, I think.
I agree, though I do really like Persist. I guess I'll spoil one of the things that I was leaving for the league discussion, but I think that Persist plus Grief is just like a really, really solid start. It's a way to subsidize playing a broken Persist part of your deck just by having, a good default thing to do with it.
Yeah. The other deck that stood out to me in 10th place here from Magic Dan was it's Mardu Shadow, but it's effectively Rakdos Splashing Prismatic Ending. And so that card solves a lot of issues for the deck. So stuff like Chalice of the Void, which could be a big annoyance in the past. Oriole Champion, Sanctifier on deck now as well. Cards which really just brickrolled your entire offense against stuff like Heliod. Kills Heliod itself as well. This is actually one of the good answers to that card now. in the format. But often, you know, this deck having such a low mana curve is one of the big draws to it. And some of the time, Prismatic Ending is 1 mana, kill your Swiftspear, kill your Amulet of Vigor, which is going to be a very common use case in this format now. So Prismatic Ending in these very low to the ground aggressive decks, I think I think that's a great home for that card. And then beyond that, we have 4 Dragon's Rage Channeler and 4 Ragavan to go with the rest of our threats here. And one of the issues that specifically Black-Red Death Shadow always had with Scourge of the Skyclaves was you just don't have the good 1-drops to turn that card on. And they were never that good as Monastery Swiftspear decks, but you kind of had to play that card just to get your Scourge down on turn 2 consistently. Now you can do that without really having to play any cards that you're unhappy about putting in your deck.
Yeah, and Ragavan lets you really extend those prismatic endings. You got to be able to make all the colors.
Also, when you have such a low curve, often you're not really doing that much with your mana. So yeah, you flip over that 2-drop, you can cast that and something else at the same time.
Yeah. I guess I kind of knew this up front, and I probably should have known it more. But it feels like a lot of what Ragavan is trying to do is make mana and maybe accidentally draw a card. And I think that this deck does a pretty good job of utilizing that.
Yeah, if you can use every part of the Buffalo, if the 2 damage matters, which it certainly does here, and if the mana matters, which it will basically everywhere, but you're always going to have a good way to use exactly 1 mana in this deck for the most part. And then also, sometimes you can just play Protect the Queen or Protect the King with Ragavan, use your removal, use your discard to clear the way for it, and that's going to be this card advantage engine, the kind of Dark Confidant here in 2021, winning you the game by itself.
Do you think Scourge of the Skyclaves was ever kicked? Do you think anyone remembers that card as kicker?
It's a lot more feasible now with Ragavan than it ever has been. I'll say that much.
Okay. Yeah, that's
the answer is still no, by the way, but we okay. we dare to dream.
Okay, good. That's what I thought. Yeah, I think that about covers everything that caught my eye from that challenge.
The only other things about this deck I would mention are in the sideboard we have 3 copies of Damn, and so this is a deck that actually does get to use both halves of that card, where sometimes it's Walk the Plank, I suppose, it's just 2 mana, kill a creature, and maybe the mana cost is a little restrictive there. But then if you get into a drawn-out game against another creature deck, this is, 4 mana Damnation, and then next turn I'll play my Lurrus and start, or maybe Escape Croxer and just rebuild instantly from there. So love the flexibility of that card in this shell. And then one other thing, which is not exclusive to this deck by any means, and I think this card should be inclusive in as many decks as possible, is Engineered Explosives. I think that card is exceptional at the moment. Not just against a deck like this, first of all, with such a low curve, even lower than before, but also against these various food decks where you can clean up Urza Saga constructs and food tokens and other stuff all at the same time. You can clear the board of cookbooks and ovens and familiars and so on. I think that card's status in the format is as good as it's ever been, basically.
Also, Asmore has a or a mana value of 0, so add that to the pile. Also cleans up Crashing Footfalls. I think that another one of the things I said is that I think that card is, this is from my Urza Saga article again, I don't like it if it's just answering Urza Saga like it would, against like Amulet Titan. It's not doing the best because it's like, well, if they're making Construct, it doesn't work out great. They've got an Amulet and 2 Constructs, you're not killing the whole thing. But if you're catching the rest of their deck, which is what is going on with these Asmore decks, or something like Pure Steel Paladin, or even some of the like Hardened Scales does have this issue sometimes where like you would just naturally Engineered Explosives them anyways. It's really nice to just have this card to mop up some constructs if that's what happens, or just mop up the rest of the deck if that's what's happening that game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that's a good way to understand Urza Saga's place in the format, where it's really tough to know exactly how much to target it specifically, where if that is just one thing that's going on in the deck, you can't just hard target that because, firstly, your cards might not even be good at doing that. And then secondly, what about the other 56 cards they have going on? But you kind of want these tools which are generically good, both against that card and other things. And then when you draw them, sometimes they just line up perfectly against this Saga A plan or B plan, whatever it happens to be there.
Yep. You really got a dual purpose against that card because it is just a bunch of card advantage, and you will lose to it if you don't. If you just try to answer specific aspects of it, you're gonna have issues. It's so compact, so much value that like even like a spreading sea setup is not even guaranteed to really get you anywhere.
Absolutely. And so with that, we'll take a short break and then we'll come back and dive into these leagues.
What's up, everybody? Cedric Phillips here, stopping by real quick to let you know about one of Star City Games' newest podcasts, The Receivables, hosted by yours truly, alongside my partner in crime, of course, Patrick Sullivan, where the two of us discuss Magic sets, both past and present, from top to bottom. On every episode of The Receivables, you're going to hear us talk about the facts of a set, the mechanics of a set, the cycles of a set, you know, the boring stuff, before we get into some crazy stories of when we were playing Magic during the times that the set was legal. We've got a ridiculous award show where we give out awards like the Char Rumbler Award for weirdest card in a set, the Oko Thief of Crowns Award for best card in the set, and a whole bunch more. Before we finally decide, hey, what card won the set and what letter grade should we give the set? It's a whole lot of fun. We're having a blast recording them. Hopefully you have the opportunity to listen to it and you enjoy it as much as we're enjoying recording them. Where can you find it? StarCityGames.com or wherever else you listen to your podcast. The Receivables every single week here at SCG.
All right, and we're back here to jump into one of the biggest league debt dumps, I'm reliably assured, of all time here. And there are a lot of goodies to sink our teeth into here.
Yeah. I found it's really interesting. There's a mix of like typical league nonsense that's worth thinking about, but also like just good developments to existing decks that didn't show up in the challenges. One of the things like I noticed at first was just like, oh, I think this was, and Nassif had this in 9th place in one of the challenges, to be fair, but Grief is really good in Living End. And that was something that showed up in these lists in the leagues. And I kind of wonder, you know, there is a blue Living End deck that splits between blue and black to play Grief and Subtlety. But like traditional Living End with Demonic Dread also like got Titan Othrex recently, and that's a pretty big game breaker, and also has Foundation Breaker in Grief, and it might actually still be functional.
It really does not get that much bigger than Titan Othrex in this format, or really any other format either. That card is really, really big. And we mentioned before how these 2 mana cyclers in Living End, almost always you would rather have 2 1-mana cyclers, or be able to use your mana more efficiently. And how much of an upgrade is Arcfiend of Vifnir to Desert Ceradon or Horror of the Broken Lands most of the time? It turns out that 11/11 Trample is a really, really big upgrade, literally and figuratively, to other things. And so you can play these smaller Living Ends, so to speak, where you're only getting 2 creatures back, but that by itself is enough to dominate the board.
Yeah, 11/11 is as big as 2 monstrous Carabids and a Deadshot Minotaur, for those of you with old Living End math to convert to.
Yeah, it's some quick math right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is somewhat awkward that Grief, if you're taking a creature, it kind of puts it exactly where it needs to be for Living End, although there certainly are some creatures in the format where you can do that safely. So against Hardened Scales, for example, you know, you take their Hangback Walker, you take their Ballista, that one is not coming back off of Living End. Or sometimes you're happy to take a creature now, even knowing that it's going to come back, because by the time it does come back, you're prepared for that. You have an entire board yourself cluttered up with these big creatures ready to fight back against it.
Yeah, and also on the way back, Grief can take something like a Supreme Verdict that threatens to reset the entire state that you've worked hard to create.
Yeah, I do wonder as well if... so we see these Cascade Living End decks, those are the go-to at this point, and they are vying for metagame share with the Cascade Crashing Footfalls decks, of which more to come, certainly. But I wonder if there is some kind of like Asphalt Hold, Profane Tutor, Living End thing going on here, where maybe that's the way you get redundancy on both halves of that, while also being able to play Grieve, Force Negation, whatever kind of interactive pieces you want there.
That sounds like I'm pretty skeptical of that, because it sounds like you're basically trying to assemble 2 cards to make 1 card. It would make more sense if people were aiming at your Living Ends with like Archon of Emeria as opposed to Chalice of the Void, but nothing they're really trying to stop you with is attacking, you know, the specific pattern of cascading.
let's touch quickly on one of the weirder Cascade decks that we've seen in Modern ever, and this is Glimpse of Tomorrow, which I know you wrote about as a preview piece for SCG. And this has perhaps the best evoke creature of all time here, Ari, in Wavesifter? Question mark.
Yeah.
I should give the text on that one just for the uninitiated, where I kind of expect people to know Grief and Solitude at this point, but unless you've been going really deep in those MH2 drafts, which a fair play to you if you have, then you might not know this one. So this is 3 green blue for a 3/2 flyer, and when it enters the battlefield, you investigate twice, so you create 2 clue tokens, and it has evoke for green and blue. And you might be thinking, why would any deck possibly want this card? And I will leave it to you to explain why that might be the case.
Well, you see, it makes 2 permanents, and that's more than 1. And then when you cast Glimpse, that's 2 more permanents. I will say I think this deck is a bit of a concession to the fact that the Glimpse deck I wrote about is I don't think functional on Magic Online. I think it may just start resetting the game when you go to win, just because you have so many clues and things going on. So what this deck is doing is it just has a bunch of Eldrazi and is trying to cascade into Glimpse of Tomorrow. And hopefully you flip like an Omniscience or Eldrazi, and that's good enough. It's the show and tell equivalent to the format. Not a lot of like very tricky stuff going on. There's a lot of slots. It's very similar to like the Tybalt's Trickery kind of thing, where you're like, a lot of my cards are wasted. I'm cascading into a specific thing and wishing myself good luck.
Yeah, there is a tension at the heart of this card where if you compare it to something like Hypergenesis, for example, you are very happy just turboing that card out as soon as possible, dumping all of your big things onto the board, and hoping to win the game in short order. If you try that with this deck, you just won't have the permanence necessary to actually get a reliable payoff from your Glimpse of Tomorrow. And so you almost have to either delay the game to the point where naturally you have more stuff lying around, or find ways to cheat in just uh, pieces of cardboard, which can be counted up for your Glimpse of Tomorrow. And so that's why you see, 4 main deck Leyline of Sanctity and 2 main deck Leyline of the Void, where, yeah, there are certainly decks which hate to see either of those cards by themselves, and, you play Leyline of Sanctity against one of these Inquisition Thought Thieves decks, or Leyline of the Void against Dredge or the food decks. That's going to buy you a ton of time by itself. But sometimes what that does is just my Glimpse now flips it for 4 things instead of 3, and that one card may be all the difference there.
Yeah, I will say I don't love As Foretold in this deck. I don't really understand why it's not just like Ardent Plea, if that's what you're doing.
I think I agree there.
It's really inconsistent, and it's not like your short, like you're just gonna find Omniscience, right? Like your short glimpses are not going to be like, oh no, I hit it As Foretold and I'll go again. Like you're probably just going to lose a bunch of value because your deck has a bunch of spells in it. Like your second glimpse isn't going to be that good. You'll have to like draw the glimpse. It's just not an equation that works out.
Yeah, so that's the other question here is when you're casting the glimpse, what do you want to hit with it? And so this list opts for Archon of Cruelty, so the big reanimation target or thing that you cheat into play from the new set. Iona, Shield of Emeria, which can often just KO entire decks by itself. And then, of course, Emrakul the Aeon's Torn. And preparing these with Omniscience, where this can either cast any of those big creatures that you've drawn naturally, or it lets you kind of backdoor into a redraw with, if you have drawn a copy of Glimpse of Tomorrow, you can just cast that. If you drew a Cascade spell, well, no, you can play that for free and then hit another Glimpse and go again. So that seems to me like a decent mix of payoffs. One card that I saw being played, which really made sense to me, was Chancellor of the Forge. So this is the red Chancellor from that cycle, where you reveal it from your hand pre-game. You get to put a 1/1 haste goblin into play, and then I think the actual text is a 5/5, and when it ETBs, you create a 1/1 haster for each creature you control, and so that's a way to rig the permanent count for your Glimpse of Tomorrow, and also it's just a decent thing to flip into if you hit, let's say, a dead Shardless Agent and a Wave Sifter and a Chancellor. Well, that actually now is a pretty sizable board presence in its own right, even without any of the big hits that we're properly aiming for.
Yeah, I like the inclusion of Colony Garden in this list. That's another nice card along the same lines.
Yeah, we've got some Void Winnowers here in the sideboard too, for when those are the Eldrazi you really want. And also Agent of Treachery, which just a nice way to, most decks are going to have some good targets for that one. So if it's a matchup where, let's say, Iona doesn't do anything, you're against Eldrazi Tron, for example, Agent is going to be a nice upgrade to just 7/7 flying there for the most part. I do wonder how many other members of the cycle we can take this route with. So is there some kind of Cascade Resurgent Belief deck that we can stitch together somehow?
My concern there is that you're just like putting yourself into the position of being a hard graveyard deck as well. And I don't love being a like all-in deck that is also like an all-in graveyard deck. You got to choose one lane or the other and not like merge it all and then lose to like Leyline of the Void and Rule of Law. That's dicey.
That makes sense. So this deck, compared to the other Cascade decks, all of them are going to be somewhat vulnerable to Chalice of the Void. This one dodges some of the other hate running around, so stuff like Engineered Explosives for the Crashing Footfalls deck, or any kind of Graveyard Hate for the Living End deck. So it may be that if you think those decks are roughly approximate in power level, then just choosing which one to play based on where the metagame is going might be a good tool to have in your arsenal, so to speak.
Yeah. I would not include this as like it's like the specialty tool that like you ask when you're ever going to need this screwdriver. The other ones are the ones you're going to use. That's you got your Phillips head and your flathead, and that's living end and rhinos. And
yeah, this is the rusty, unloved part of the Swiss Army knife that over there in the corner. Let's circle back to more normal Magic here. So this is I guess, a Rakdos mid-range deck that we saw from Adam Snook, who was very pleased with the developments going on here on Twitter. So this is Dragon's Rage Channeler, Ragavan, Dreadhorde Arcanist, Dauthi Voidwalker, and Croxer. So that's 16 premier threats, all of which still allow us to play Lurrus. And so this is a very low to the ground black-red deck, following the traditional Jund template, but not having to go all the way up the curve to stuff like Liliana or Bloodbraid Elf.
Yep, looks great. These are the cards you should be playing instead of bad Jund cards.
Yeah, I will say I grow ever higher on Dauthi Voidwalker the more and more I see it played, where, especially decks like Yawgmoth or Living End, or there are all of these decks running around where that is the card they really do not want to see, and you just get to main deck it now. You get to main deck the best hate card on a threat which, I have seen that 3/2 Shadow Body just as an attacker be the thing that is closing out the game more so than Channeler or Ragavan or anything else. And if the board is getting gummed up, as it's wont to do against, 4/4 Rhino tokens, or, if Heliod is still a big thing, a lot of those decks just cannot really answer a Voidwalker that cleanly. So that's the thing that gets you across the finish line. And then sometimes you just get to completely high roll with that card. So you get paired against that Glimpse of Tomorrow deck, for example. Sometimes you just you get to cast Emrakul for free instead of them doing that. So yeah, very impressed with that card, and very impressed with this shell on the whole. I think black midrange is legitimately very good in modern. You just have to, slaughter those sacred cows, not bother with stuff like Bloodbraid Elf, and just keep it clean, lean, and efficient.
Yeah, welcome to the future where Lurrus is better than every other card that you could play in these decks. I will say that another deck that the Dauthi tends to cause issues for is Hardened Scales, shutting off all the modular, but also Hangerback Walker. A card that normally plagues this style of deck is just not relevant. It's just a bad, stupid creature that dies to removal instead of making a bunch of Thopters.
Yeah, so I expect that card's stock to just keep rising further and further over time. Where else do we want to get into here? Because we are now getting into the territory of, oh yeah, this is the stuff that you expect to 5-0 league and then never hear from again. But maybe, if everything aligns correctly.
Well, let's talk about. So we talked about a Ragavan deck. I want to talk about a different Ragavan deck, or maybe a different monkey. I think you had this listed first, but we can talk about the other versions of this. So this is Gruul Ponza. So the other monkey is the old Diamond Hands itself, Gorilla Shaman, getting paired with liquid metal coating for the most efficient way to repeatedly destroy your opponent's lands.
Yeah, we've seen this Khan liquid metal coating thing usually it's just a tactic that you free roll with the cards that want to be in your deck anyway. But then we have seen lists that really lean hard into that with stuff like Ancient Grudge or Braid or so many other ways to take this. There was a list during the Oko era where, coating with Oko could just turn lands progressively into 3/3 elves. So if you really want to lean hard into those interactions, you can do that, and this list certainly does. So we have 3 coating main deck and then 1 in the board for Khan, along with 2 of Braid, 4 Pillage, which usually seen blowing up lands, but also hits artifacts, don't forget, so now can hit anything, even creatures, planeswalkers, whatever you like, with the help of a coating. And then we have 2 Gorilla Shamans as well. Also 2 Obsidian Charmor. So this is legitimately a Gruul land destruction deck and not just, I guess we're calling it that because it has 4 Blood Moon and 4 Pillage, as it usually is.
Yeah, I've heard some speculation around Charmaw just being good. It is easy to forget it has flying with the smoke obscuring the wings in the art, but it does fly. It is just a big doofus that kills a land and hits your opponent. There's not a lot wrong there with the card.
Like at 5 mana, maybe it's a little too, that sacred price is a bit too much to bear. You only really need it to cost 4 for this to actually start looking like a very good card, right? 4 mana for 4/4 flyer that destroys the land. That is pretty formidable. You would happily play that in a lot of decks. And so even though the discount is restricted by, it has to be a land that could produce colors, this hits any non-basic land. And so it's not like, you only live in fear of this if you are a Tron deck or an Urza Saga deck of some description. Your 5-color Niv Mizzet deck is really going to have to worry about this one as the game goes along.
Is there even a modern deck that doesn't have targets for this?
Merfolk? That is a very good question.
No, it even costs less versus Merfolk because it kills Cavernous Souls and Mutavault that way.
I guess that's the thing about the monocolor decks in Modern. One of the benefits of doing that is you get to run a bunch of these different utility lands, right? Whether it's Cavern of Souls, Mutavault, God knows what else. So this is always going to have some targets. And I guess like the M Hayashi mono red prowess deck, but even that has nonsense like Blast Zone or Raging Fountain most of the time. So yeah, I think literally every deck in Modern does have some targets for this.
Yeah, and I want to jump from this into the discussion of Ragavan plus Blood Moon, which I think is I did see that in a Gruul list, but I saw a mono red like the Obosh Prowess list picking that up, and I think that that's like a really good place to move in the format. Aside from the stuff I said about Solitude and creatures being a bad idea, Blood Moon's a pretty good idea. It's really good against the entire Amulet Titan deck from Urza Saga to the rest of it, and pretty good against the other Urza Saga decks. Not because it kills Urza Saga in like the whole nonsense rules interaction way, but just because like you want to turn off Urza Saga with a card that does something. And Blood Moon certainly does things. And Ragavan is a card that's not just like a Birds of Paradise that lets you turn to your Blood Moon, which is pretty great.
Yeah, especially those Obosh red decks often ran into these issues where they had to play 1-drops because otherwise their deck just didn't really do anything. But also with those 1-drops, their deck didn't really do anything either. Ragavan does stuff. It does a lot of stuff, and not all of that stuff is going to be relevant all of the time. But turn on Ragavan in a deck that can back it up with burn spells and other removal. Fury is a card that you see in those decks being used to great effect, and then also has a bunch of high impact 3-drops to ramp into. That also sounds like a perfect home for Ragavan.
Yeah, this deck is basically mono red splashing Arbor Elf and Utopia Sprawl.
Yeah, which we've seen some of these splashing Birds of Paradise for fixing decks in the past. Always a weird concept, but sometimes it is actually what you need. Going further down this list, I want to touch on this. I guess you would call it like a Teemo Kiki Jiki deck. So this is Arbor Elf Utopia Sprawl. We have Birds of Paradise as well, so really leaning hard on the ramp here. And then we have 4 Pestimite, 4 Deceiver Exarch, which pair very well with Utopia Sprawl, right? And often you can just change several spells together in the course of the same turn. We have 4 Kiki Jiki, so this is, I guess, not literally a Splinter Twin situation, but as close as we're going to get for now. And then we have Collected Company and Imperial Recruiter, which Recruiter can fetch either half of the Exarch or Pestimite and Kiki Jiki combo, and then with Company, you can kind of backdoor into the Kiki Jiki via Imperial Recruiter. So This deck it can just play like a normal mid-rangey game for the most part, but it does have these quite explosive draws, and then you have this consistent combo finish with direct tutors, and then also the added consistency of Collector Company as well.
Yeah, I think this is the deck that would benefit the most from looking at some of the Abundant Harvest plus Ether Vial setups from the from the winning the challenge list.
Yes.
I think that this would. I think that you really want to mix Imperial Recruiter with Ether Vial just because it's an expensive card, and Ether Vial is the best way to make 1 billion mana to do that. And I think that from there, you like start talking about these combo setups, and then you start talking about wanting the same kind of like Abundant Harvest so you can, adjust your land spell count so that you don't flood or have issues. I think that that's where I would start looking for these decks.
Yeah, and also when you have Recruiter and Collector Company, the value of just a random one-off that either of those cards can hit gets a lot higher. So, for example, I have to think that one copy of Magus of the Moon in this main deck, we have a few in the sideboard here, I think that would go a long way because, sometimes that is the Recruiter target you want, and so you can draw that, or you can draw the Recruiter, or you can like company into the Recruiter and then find you the Magus. Or sometimes company just hits Magus by itself, and that is Yahtzee against like Amulet Titan, for example. So there is a tension between building your deck to maximize consistency and then building your deck to really exploit the consistency that something like Recruiter adds to your deck just by existing there.
Yeah, I do want to bridge from there to I guess there was a list that did have the Ether Vials. I missed them in the Yorion stack of Imperial Recruiter Yorion stuff. But one other thing that featured in this kind of similar, you have the Splitter Twin Shell, but you can also Recruiter for Felidar Guardian, and then flicker the Recruiter and then get the Kiki, that whole thing. Brought Back showed up alongside Solitude and Fury. So you can, and Mishra's Bauble. So Brought Back is a M9 or M20. Sorry, it's from the actual Broken set. Wow, I should have known that. White, instant. Choose up to 2 target permanent cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. Return them to the battlefield tapped. So that is another way to recur Solitude or Fury. You can pick up an extra card on a fetch land or Mishra's Bauble. I thought that was some really nice tech.
Yeah, in your M20 block constructed deck, you can go, Lotus Field and Drawback. Maybe that is if you find yourself playing that format for some reason, maybe that's something to explore. But yeah, again, that basic core of Solitude, Ephemerate, and then generic, tricky Ether Vial, Recruiter kind of stuff, very, very solid, and so many different ways you can build around it. So if you're looking at something which is proven, but also has a lot more room to iterate and explore with, whether for competitive or for fun purposes, then I would definitely start there for sure.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about some things that have less creatures now, or do we want to talk about things that have as many or more creatures?
Let's go creature heavy for now. Let's keep it there.
I love that a bunch of people besides me thought about triggering Rage Forger twice with Harmonic Prodigy because it makes me feel like I'm not crazy.
Okay. So this is, I guess, Gruul Shamans is what the style guide would recommend for this one. So this is Harmonic Prodigy, which doubles the triggered abilities of other wizards or shamans, along with Rage Forger, which, let's see if I can get this one from memory here. So you put a +1/+1 counter on each elemental or shaman, not sure which there, and then when you attack, or whenever a shaman attacks, it deals 1 to an opponent.
It's put a +1/+1 counter on each shaman, and then whenever a creature with a +1/+1 counter attacks, it deals 1. So some of the other stuff that Harmonic Prodigy, so with Rage Forger, it doubles the counters and then it doubles the damage. So like a single Rage Forger is effectively +4 to an attacker with a Harmonic Prodigy, and that's not like a single attacker, that's each shaman. Now Prodigy isn't a shaman, it's a wizard, but like that is crazy amounts of damage. But like Prodigy also doubles Ignoble Hierarch's Exalted and Burning Tree Emissary's mana. And this deck has Elvish Visionary too. The only thing I don't like about this list is I would just cut the lightning bolts. I just want to play creatures and collected companies. That's all I want in my life with this.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that Lightning Bolt is that good in this format right now anyway. Maybe that changes with the number of Ragavans and Stoneforge Mystics and so on that you see floating around. But I like staying on plan in your main deck for the most part. And if the removal option is not that appealing to begin with, then yeah, I think just go full bore into the Shaman plan. I do think as well that these creature-heavy red decks, I think Fury, I mean, it doesn't directly replace Lightning Bolt, of course. They're very different cards that often do different things. But if you just need removal that can help you to force damage through, I think Fury is a good way of doing that gives you this good mid-range mana sink as well. Especially in a deck where, if you are doubling Burning Tree Emissaries and going off, sometimes you go, turn 2 Prodigy, turn 3 Emissary into Hardcast Fury and something else, and now that is a formidable turn that you've just assembled there.
Yeah, because with the Shaman netting you mana off the Prodigy, like, you really get somewhere, and you need something to do with that. I guess Collecting Company is the thing you're supposed to be doing with that, but you need other things to do.
Yeah, but this deck is adorable. Don't know how good it is exactly. Maybe just a one-hit wonder, but this is something I could see myself trying to speedrun a league with, because you find out pretty quick with this deck whether it has what it takes or not.
Yeah. Again, it has creatures that die to Solitude, so I'm a little skeptical of it in the short term. But, it is a good league deck because not all your opponents will be trying to do that in the league. This is also not the only place for Harmonious Prodigy, right?
I was going to say, this is a deck that also has 4 Flamekin Harbingers, so you can just find your Fury, if that's what the game is going to be about. And then also, we see in the sideboard 4 Makers of the Moon, for when all of this silly Shaman nonsense is too much, and you just want to one-hit KO them with a single card.
Oh, Magus of the Moon. Sadly, not an elemental that you can find with Flamekin Harbinger, but, it's... you take what you get.
Do. Yeah. Yes. So what other Harmonic Prodigy nonsense caught your eye this week?
Fanatic Amogus, just the usual, just doubling up the nice little red there, and also Flame Tongue Yearling making an appearance.
Yeah, this is the return of Mono Red Devotion in the hands of one Raging Tilt monster. So this is 4 Nykthos and then a bunch of mountains, and to pair with those, we have Goblin Chainwhirler as a card that Red Devotion would have loved to have in its standard hair day. Flame Tongue Yearling, as you mentioned, one of the more under-the-radar additions from MH2, but a great role player here. And yeah, we're building all the way up here towards Fanatic Amogus. And so this is when a 4-2, 4-3 in a red, when it ETBs, it deals damage from an opponent equal to your devotion to red. And so with Harmonic Prodigy and all of the double pip or triple pip red devotion cards, you can often just one-shot your opponent with a single Fanatic here.
Yeah, you only need to get it to, 10 devotion? That's totally easy.
Yeah, maybe a little too ambitious, but I love the Moxie on display in this deck list, and another one to add to the queue of decks to just rattle off a league with at some point.
Yeah, this is the problem with 100 deck lists from a league, is that you can't possibly finish trying them all before the next league gives you 100 deck lists to try.
Yeah, it is the most generic statement you can say about a deck, right? Especially if you're trying to be kind, is, oh, well, I don't know if it has what it takes in the long term, but I'll fire up a league with it, and there is just not the time of the day to do that past a certain point. But another deck that I could very easily see me saying that about and joining that list is 5-color Elementals really leaning into these this evoke cycle here. So this is Kahira as a companion, of course, why not, when all of your deck is 37 elementals. And so we have 3 Solitude, 2 Fury, 2 Subtlety here in the main deck, and some Endurances to join them in the sideboard. And so it turns out when you want to be pitching blue cards and red cards and green cards and white cards all at the same time, On-Math Locus of Creation does all of that and so much more. And you have a bunch of these multicolored elementals that can tick several of those boxes at once. And this deck has always been built around Risen Reef and trying to go off hard with that. And the Evoke cycle lets you go off of that even harder, where you can play Risen Reef and train this into your Solitude, your thing, and draw a card to get some of that card advantage or nullify some of that card disadvantage. So you can have some truly obscene turns with Risen Reef in this deck.
Yeah, that is a card that it's just really awkwardly costed. It's one of those things that once it resolves, you're doing something powerful enough for the format, but like getting it to resolve and stick is a big ask.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know how this stacks up compared to even just the other tribal decks or other uh, evoke decks, I suppose. This deck, because it is Ancient Ziggurat, Cabinet of Souls, Primal Beyond, the elemental version of those, to support all of these different elementals, there's not really room for actual colored spells. So I don't think there's a good way to work Ephemerate into this deck, but I would want to try at the very least because that seemed like a perfect fit if you can cast it.
I'm kind of disappointed there's not a way to increase Thunderkin Awakener's toughness to keep flashing back Solitude, or not like a simple way to do it.
Yeah, I guess you would have to. So it starts with 2 toughness, and you need to get it to 3. So maybe it's worth having like an incandescent soul stick or something too dutiful for those situations.
Well, the Awakener's already a tutor target. I think there might be some more research to be done in that department.
Yeah, I don't know if this one Cloudkin Seer, for example, is the best use of that slot.
Yeah, it's that certainly looks like a draft common accidentally showed up in our deck.
Yeah, but if you feel like going on some very deep dive down the Scryfall rabbit hole, finding these different elementals, then I think that might be a fun use of your time. Let's talk about another creature deck here in Goblins. So this deck was briefly all the rage when Conspicuous Snoop hit the scene. That combo with Boggart Harbinger threatening a turn 3 kill in this creature mid-range deck, that seemed like a very good recipe. Didn't really make much of a mark beyond that, but I think one big reason for that, honestly, was it just didn't have that many good one drops. So you're an Ether Vial deck, but you can't use Ether Vial right away because putting in Scope Prospector is not that impressive. And so this might be the actual deck that gains the most from Ignoble Hierarch, being a good one drop that ramps you into your good 2 drops and 3 drops, which also happens to be a goblin to tie the room together.
My concern is that my issue with this deck was how it faced up against a bunch of creature removal, which again makes me worried for Solitude just being one of the best cards in the format and seeing a bit of a resurgence of Izzet prowess. But Hierarch certainly helps with what it was good at, which is just being a powerful, like proactive linear deck that's going to combo kill your opponent in a way that ignores a lot of stuff, but also a deck that like is functional if you aren't combo killing.
I do think that between Matron, Ringleader, and Slengang Lieutenant, it's not that difficult to just grind through a pile of removal spells. This was always one of the strengths of goblins in Extended or Legacy, even without stuff like Patriarch's Bidding, is Goblin Ringleader is just good against Lightning Bolt, right? It's not good against Dragon's Rage Channeler and Sprite Rage Dragon, and Sprite Dragon, into Lightning Bolt. And that I think is still an issue for this deck, is you cannot play this in a World of Lava Dart. This isn't really a World of Lava Dart, though. I think Solitude actually is a somewhat less oppressive litmus test for these strategies than a deck like Varus was.
I don't know. It depends on what kind of pressure the Solitude decks are applying. I think it depends on whether Munitions Expert is enough to keep them off their guard, at which point you're just trading Shriek Maws and your deck with, more Mole Drifter effects is better at that. But if they're actually doing something beyond Solitude that's going to try to kill you, I think you might be behind in that exchange.
I do also love 3 Makers of the Moon in our 3-color deck with 1 basic land, but it's a basic mountain because most of our deck is red, and so we can get away with that here.
Yeah, an Ether Vial, if you can't cast a black card after the fact, it's fine.
Yeah, you'll find a way. Don't worry. It'll all solve itself. Let's touch on a deck with many, many fewer creatures here. So this is it controlled with Murktide Region as its main finisher? And this is one of the applications for that card that we highlighted when we previewed the card ourselves here on Dominaria's Judgment. And I think this shell has a lot going for it, where one issue with Izzet in the past has just been big creatures that didn't die to Lightning Bolt. And so now you also have additional ways to deal with those. Fire Ice can delay those for a few turns, can tap that Tarmogoyf to draw a card. But sometimes you just play a 7/7 dragon and dare them to attack into it.
Yeah, this looks like all the cards you could also play in a Dragon's Rage Channeler deck, so I don't really know what the upside here is. I guess Blood Moon is pretty nice. But again, you could be a little more aggressive with it. I think that this might be like too far to one end of the spectrum. But I'm fine with exploring what lies between the Luris pseudo Delver deck and this.
I wonder if this is a deck where you could just sideboard your channelers, right? Where game one, their pushes and their lightning bolts have no good targets, and they expect that to be the case in game two, so they board them out, and then you just punk them with this one drop that becomes a 3-drop or becomes a 3/3 while also filtering a bunch of cards and letting you play this fish game.
Possibly. I think you have to commit to Mishra's Bauble, which kind of changes some of your other decisions. Maybe it's just you can't really merge Murktide Regent with Channeler quite as effectively in this format because of how much Luris plays into the value of Channeler. I'm not entirely sure.
We did see with the legacy decks where initially the blue-red Delver decks that had all of these one-drops, they started with 4 Bauble, and then eventually people shaved those. It went from 4 to 3 to 2. And now you see lists consistently popping up that just don't even have Bauble because they're so good at naturally getting Delirium, getting enough cards in their graveyard for Delve, that they just don't need that effect. And so here, maybe you just don't need that, especially when you have Thought Scour, where that card by itself often is going to be enough to get you across that finish line.
Well, the legacy lists are kind of a tough comparison because Luris is just banned, right? So we don't have to worry about that decision there.
Sure. I guess in blue-red, that decision is taken out of your hands, but then Regent is kind of directly competing for some of those same resources, but something to think about. And if you're a Blue Moon fan, if for some reason that strategy appeals to you, then I think this is a good 2021 implementation of that does have a legs to compete in Modern still.
I think a lot of people are Blue Moon fans. It just kind of like catches you and you go through a phase, and that's just fine. Just like you come out of it at the end, you're like, wow, I'll never Blue Moon again. And then guess what? 2 years later, you're like, well, what if Master of Waves did it for me this time?
Master of Waves still does it for me, but really hard to put that card in your deck when Motide Regent is right there waiting for you.
Yeah. You can just get all the power for 2 mana instead of having to do any other work. Yeah, it's a little dated there.
Maybe there's some Risen Reef Master of Waves stuff we can do with Subtlety in the mix. Someone take that up and get it into the next deck list done.
Yeah, please do get that big Mondo combo set up with also the Mystic Reflection, just the full-on shebang.
Oh god, yeah. Where do you want to go next?
Let's talk about a shell, or the shells that are trying to, or maybe successfully even, implementing Ephemerate plus Grief.
Okay, so one of them, let's start with the most ambitious one here, or one of the more ambitious ones. This is Abzan with good old Siege Rhino, a nice throwback here to early 2015 Modern, in a deck with a lot of Modern Horizons 2 cards. We have a Grist working its way into the mix here. That's a card which, incredibly powerful for what it does, but a lot of the kind of Jund-ish mid-range decks that might want it either don't have green anymore altogether, or they're trying to support Luris, and at that point, you really have to ask some tough questions. But if your deck can support Grist, then by all means, play a copy or two. But this has Ignoble Hierarch to work against the inefficiencies that this deck is sometimes prone to, and then sometimes it lets you just cast Grief on turn 3, naturally attack with it, boost its power for Menace on turn 4, so like those synergies there. But yeah, this is your basic Grief Ephemerate shell with a bunch of mid-range stuff surrounding it here.
Yeah, the main thing I wanted to point out from this list was that Crime Punishment is a really good card to be exiling to these incarnations. It has the colors of the best ones, and then is one of the most effective one-off answers to an Urza Saga.
Yeah, so this is the punishment half specifically is XBG. Destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments with converted mana cost, or I guess mana value now, X. And so you can play this for BG, for X equals 0. That will blow up Urza Saga itself, and then also any constructs that it's made already, any food tokens lying around. You get the whole thing. All of it's gone. This list doesn't even run Solitude, which maybe is not a mistake when you have access to the black removal, you have Fatal Push, you have Prismatic Ending. At that point, I don't know how much more removal you can play in your main deck, but it seems like those synergies are so powerful that some copies, at least in the sideboard, would be worth it.
And again, the Ephemerate interaction with that card is just so crushing that you almost could say, well, I don't need a sweeper in my sideboard because I'm just going to board into Solitude, and that's good enough. So yeah, I do wonder about actual 0 spell lanes in this deck as well, like no Malakir Rebirths or Amaria's Call. Is that the white one?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, you might want a little bit of that to kind of push your colored card numbers around the right way.
Talk to me about Mavinda Student's Advocate here, Ari.
Okay, so this was in another deck that, well, it took the persist interaction a little further, which I was kind of impressed with the interaction between smallpox, persist, discarding Archon of Cruelty, and that's kind of like your setup for the broken half of persist when you're also like persisting grief and solitude for value. Um,
I want to say, for the record, I love that this deck has 3 copies of Dark Confidant. Just that number, straight up, is always surprising to see. But in a deck that has 4 Grief and 3 Solitude, where we are cheating the sticker price on those consistently, and 2 Archon of Cruelty as the big finisher for our Persist, and also just the 1 Cauldron Compliant at the 7-drop mark for our Stoneforge Mystic, of which we only have 3 copies to begin with. I'm not quite sure why the Dark Confidants made their way in. I guess we can't even persist those because then it just dies right away. Make it make sense, Ari.
you can pitch it to grief.
Yeah, that is a thing you can do for sure.
Okay. So the Mavinda thing, though. So Mavinda is from Strixhaven. It is it's your handy little owl teacher. It's a legendary creature bird advisor. So it's 2 and a white, 2/3 flying. This is the one that's got the 0 and the 8 on it. So 0, you may cast target instant or sorcery from your graveyard this turn. If it doesn't target a creature you control, it costs 8 more to cast this way. And if we put into a graveyard, exile it instead this turn. You can target Ephemerate with this, cast it, and then the Ephemerate rebound puts it into exile. The Mavinda sees it already going to exile, so it doesn't replace that. And then it's just rebounding in exile, and you just get to loop it forever.
Yeah, and crucially, because rebounding it takes it out of the range of that exile clause, you just get to do the thing as many times as you want over and over again. And in a deck that also has Malakir Rebirth, where you get to kind of activate the extra protection from that after the fact, where if they're trying to kill your Mavinda with a lightning bolt or something, you now get to rebirth your Mavinda, and then Mavinda sticks around to rebuy something else. So a lot of cool stuff going on here. I think it's trying to do a little bit too much, but this basic core, if you slim it down, I mean, this is a good recipe for success, I think.
Yeah, I would keep the smallpox, Archon, grief, solitude, ephemerate parts of it, and then just rethink a lot of the rest of it.
I would add a full Stoneforge Mystic. Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. We're on the same page.
Perfect. So, any other? I think that's all of the ephemerate decks. Although we can never be fully done with those. Are there any that I'm skipping past here?
I think that was about it. I had a brief moment where I forgot that you couldn't. There's an unmarked grave list that did similar things, I believe, with grief and finding all the targets reanimate and then persisting grief. But I had a brief moment where I was like, oh, why don't we unmark grave the Cauldron complete and then cast Dakon? And then I realized this whole legendary clause is on every card instead of just.
It's there for a reason, Ari. Yeah. I'm looking at that list now. So I think Priest of Fellrights is an interesting angle there, where that is the kind of a 1-2 punch with Unmarked Grave, where you can get the Archon into play on turn 3 or whatever else. But also, this is a card that carries equipment. It can buy back your Grief or your Solitude. It pitches to both of those cards at the same time as well. And then it gives you this mana sink in these mid-game top deck wars, where both players have traded off all their resources. You draw your 5th land, and suddenly that becomes a Priest, which becomes a Grief or a Solitude or something. So I think that is worth looking into as well here.
Yeah, it might be the good version of Persist. It's also worth noting with Unmarked Grave that is your way to tutor for a reanimate spell. You find the Priest and then unearth it. You don't even need an Unburial Rites. You just get to play a good card. It is kind of weird that this deck, so these last 2 decks have only played 2 equipment. You probably want to find a good third if you're doing this.
Yeah, I guess these versions don't have much of an interest in Maul of the Skyclaves, which was a go-to for a while. I don't know what that third one would be, though. You don't have Jitte in this format, which may be for the better. I don't know. So I don't know if there's something which fills a niche that Batterskull plus Cauldron between them don't cover already.
Yeah, I guess usually that would just be the third batter skull, but you already effectively have two big doofuses to find, so that's fine. And you don't really want the sword, so maybe there just isn't a card.
Yeah, so we are actually seeing a decent number of these Grief Ephemerate shells. It's just they haven't put up that one big finish to get people's attention yet.
Yeah, they're getting really close. It feels like really really close.
Yeah, and I'm interested in like seriously iterating on these and not just firing up a league with them to blow off some steam. I think there is really something worth looking at here. Let's move from 2 colors to 5 colors. Let's talk about Domain Zoo because two of the most eye-catching cards from the set, of course, were Territorial Kavu and Silent Draco, and there's a lot of debate over the best places to put those cards. Do you want them in some kind of mid-rangey zoo deck going out to like Bloodbraid Elf or something, or do you want to work the general Recurrent into the mix somehow? One list that 5 out here, this is very much in the mold of like guys might get there for those extended 2006 era denizens among you. So this is Dragon's Rage Channeler as the sole 1-drop here, and then 4 Might of Alara to pair with Boros Charm to set up these kind of out of nowhere become immense TBR kills.
They did it. It's the 20-20-20. There's 20 creatures, 20 spells, 20 lands. This is the
You'd
pure
love to see
throwback
it.
deck.
Well, does Gigantha mess with that math at all?
No. That's a sideboard card. Don't worry about it. No one ever puts Gigantha into their hand, casts it, and wins the game. It just doesn't happen.
Poor Gigantha. But yeah, this deck, I think if I was taking this more like a aggro combo slant with this deck, I would want another good 1-drop to work with. I don't know what that would be exactly. It is funny that Wildcattle has just been edged out of these decks altogether, which you think would be assuring, but that's a sign of the times, I suppose.
Yeah, I think Ragavan has been the card that I've seen the most in these decks that has been the most exciting.
That one makes sense. And that one also does let you do that line of turn 1 Ragavan, turn 2 hit them, make a treasure, and then you can fetch for your Triumph and cast Sign of Draco or a fully powered Territorial Kavu off the treasure. So, yeah, I think that might be a decent setup there. It is just so funny to me that Wild Cattle was once on the modern ban list out of fear of what it could do if it escaped from its cage, and now we have 100 and something deck lists in this dump, and it's just nowhere to be seen.
I can talk more about that a different day, but there is a very distinct reason about how card design changed since then that made Wild Nacatl just not an attractive card.
Okay, yeah, something for a blog post or a rant on here at some point, I'm sure. Let's talk about another Channeler deck, and expect to see that phrase time and time again over the weeks here. This is Emmanuel Gershenson, Gershi on Magic Online, with Mono Red Phoenix. Phoenix is being brought back. It's back from the dead, Ari, or maybe not. But this is 4 Channeler, 4 Monastery Swift Spear, 4 Soulscar Mage. So we have a 12-pack of good 1-drops for the strategy now. 4 Arclight Phoenix, and then the way that we're replacing Faithless Looting is with Faithless Salvaging, which is not anywhere in the same ballpark as that card, but maybe enough to get this one back over the line.
It does line up nice that Rebound works well, but I am skeptical if we're moving towards a heavier Solitude metagame that you want to be Arclight Phoenix.
Yes. Yeah, if anything, the main appeal to Arclight Phoenix here for me is Maximize Velocity, where that one pairs so well with your channelers, with your Paris creatures, and then having a 1-drop that you can cast for 1 mana twice on the same turn and discard the Phoenix, that makes those Phoenix sequences that much more reliable. So if anything, I might want to lean harder on that card. But people want to make fetch happen here. I don't quite think it has what it takes. Looting was such a core component to that strategy, and one of its weaknesses I found at the time was you really needed looting, because otherwise these Phoenixes were just rotting in your hand, doing nothing, where you wanted them to be basically any other card. And I don't think that dynamic has changed either.
It sounds like the deck you're describing is more of a Kiln Fiend deck that accidentally has Phoenix than whatever this is doing.
Yeah, and even then you get into this question of, do you want to jump through these hoops for Arclight Phoenix when you could play, just more Strike Dragons or more, God knows what it is. But that is another route that we haven't even discussed yet, is you have all of these good 1-drop Prowess or Prowess adjacent threats. What if we pair those with Kiln Fiend and do the aggro combo thing that way? So that's a nice angle to explore too.
Yeah, I think that goes back. We talked about Lumimancer, and that was kind of edged out by the mirror match with liability against lava darts. And I think that deck success depends a bit on that and a bit on just like the prowess creatures kind of just run into construct tokens now. It's just like, oh, how big is that? I don't think they made red cards that kill those.
One red card that kind of does kill those, we see 4 copies in the sideboard here, Unholy Heat. So this is red instant, deals 2 damage to target creature or planeswalker. If you have Delirium, it deals 6 damage instead. And so 6 damage we flagged up as a crucial breakpoint in this format where Primeval Titan is everywhere, and then Archon of Cruelty we've talked about a lot in the context of these lists so far. And even just these larger construct tokens, most of the time you're going to be able to snipe those down with a single Unholy Heat. So I would expect to see a lot of that card, and that is the way that maybe Izzet solves that Tarmogoyf problem that it used to have. Or maybe now it has its own Murktide region problem in these mirrors, where if you need to kill a big creature, this is the card to do it with.
Yeah, I agree. It even kills like Feasting Troll King, which is really absurd. It's not quite
that's another one that we can circle back to at the end here. Looking down the rest of these lists, I know we're skipping over some stuff. We have some Michael Majors specials that might be fitting to round this out with, and may even get crowned as our nonsense of the week here. But from the rest of this 100-something list that we've got here, what caught your eye?
Let's see. Outside of the Michael Majors list, I think that the like million versions of Enchantress were interesting. Specifically, the question of like whether Citizen Champion belongs anywhere, because that is a card from the broken sets of 2019-2020. That is just like a really stupidly powerful card, but like I don't really know what it's supposed to be doing if you put it in the deck. But it feels like it should be something that's considered.
Yeah, more on this in my article this week, but I think Enchantress, one thing that holds it back may be, you want to play Enchantress because it is really hard for a lot of people to deal with enchantments, but in this version, most of your engine pieces are creatures. So, cards like Lightning Bolt or Fatal Push do actually matter now. And so you can run into like the Gift Storm problem where, whatever anything, any form of interaction that they can bring to the table is going to line up against your cards in some way or another. And so one way to get around that is just to overload the removal, right? If you play a Sithis, they have to kill it. You play a Stagnant Reaver, they probably have to kill it. That then maybe leaves room for your Citizen Champion to sneak in and start doing some work there. I don't know.
Yeah, it might be the kind of thing where you're already committed to losing to that kind of effect, so you may as well overload. And even if Champion isn't a enchantment that triggers all your other stuff, it's nice to have that. Like, that might be the card if you're like, well, my opponent might have Back to Nature. It's like, well, I might have a 20/20. Who cares?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that's going to do it for most of these lists here. And I think we should not have to choose between Major's darlings for our nonsense of the week this segment. We'll go to a short break and we'll come back and see just which one of those is more nonsensical.
What's up, everyone? Justin Parnell here.
Along with Ryan Overturf, and we want to tell you about the single best podcast on the SCG network.
Well, obviously, Ryan, you're talking about the 540.
Indeed I am, and that is the best podcast because we talk about the best format in the history of Magic.
Cube Draft?
Cube Draft.
Every week we go over all things Cube.
We're talking about in-depth reviews of brand new cards.
The best ways to draft and think about Arena and Magic Online Cube formats,
as well as ways to play with your friends,
and ways to play with your enemies.
Also some ways to make your friends into your enemies.
And cardboard takes of a variety of temperatures.
So if you're a fan of structured nonsense,
or if you hate it,
either way, all the same, check out the 540 every week wherever you find your podcasts, and right here on StarCityGames.com.
Okay, and we are rounding out the episode here with our nonsense of the week, and you would think in a deck list that has over 100 lists in it, solidly into 3 figures, that there would be a lot of nonsense to go around, and there surely is. But with that in mind, even more impressive that one man somehow has managed to register the first and second place finishers in terms of what just made my eyes shoot out on beanstalks this week.
Well, you see, Watsy Andrew Brown already really had no filter on what decks he was willing to try before he joined Wizards, and afterwards, there wasn't even like a semblance of really like anything holding him back. So here we are with some Michael Major specials, and To be honest, doesn't Andrew Brown have a Pro Tour top 8 with that O3 Druid from Eldritch Moon that like makes you get a lane when listen, this is all within range for him.
Well, you see, you sacrifice it and then you get a land, and it's a combination. It's just good deck building. So, speaking of good deck building, let's start with, I guess, the less strange of these two decks. So this is Crashing Footfalls, like you've never seen it before, where we have Shardless Agent and Violent Outburst and Crashing Footfalls. So, all normal enough so far. We have some of the regular stuff like Fire Ice and the interaction that you get to play with the mana value restrictions in these decks. But then we're working our way up to the top. We've got Omnath Locus of Creation at the 4-drop slot, and then Bring to Light and one copy of Nimbus Reborn as our 5s here to go along with Teferi Time Raveler and some other stuff too. So this is a deck which still can consistently churn out 8 power, 10 power worth of Rhinos and more on turn 3, turn 4. Sometimes you do it on back-to-back turns and force them to answer these several ways. But then, if the game just isn't about that anymore, if a 4/4 isn't big enough, well, how about a 4/4 that does 4 different things at the same time in Omnath, and then we can Bring to Light for Crashing Footfalls if we want to go back to that well, or we can Bring to Light for Niv Mizzet, which finds more Bring to Lights, more Shardless Agents, more Violent Outbursts, which in turn leads to more 4/4s. If you just want to, I guess, quadruple down on your 4/4s, this might be the way to do it.
I'm skeptical this is the correct way to approach the what fair cards do I play question, but it's worth asking yourself whether like Bone Crusher Giant is actually what you want anymore. Like it's very clearly admitting that like Shardless Agent plus Violent Outburst is good enough to win games without a lot of help, and you just select a bunch of random cards. I do like how we just have like Valky in our Cascade deck, and we're like, oh well, I guess we can't Cascade into it. Don't worry, we have bigger plays.
Oh Jesus! That had not occurred to me. If I'd realized that, number 1 with a bullet for nonsense of the week. But as it is, we'll have to settle for number 2 because of errors in the judging panel here.
No. I still have this as number 1, and this is another Crashing Footfalls deck. It is Dreadhorde Arcanist Crashing Footfalls, but like so it's also Dreadhorde Arcanist with like Fatal Push and Inquisition, but like also Profane Tutor. Like you're tutoring for like your 1 of Electro Dominance, but also it's Reanimator with like 4 Unmarked Graves and 2 Persists, but like also your Unmarked Graves find Kroxa.
And then sometimes you can like Finale of Promise back your Persist or your Unmarked Grave and something else at the same time. We've got Bone Shards as a way to get these cards where they need to be. I guess we're not sacrificing things to Bone Shards too often, but if we have a Rhino token lying around from the Footfalls that we reanimated with our Arcanist, then who knows? Maybe we do.
It's pretty sad that Bone Shards is not an instant, so you can't sack the Kroxa with the sack trigger on the stack to it. I do think this deck probably wanted access to a Priest or Burial Rites as a way to unmark Grave for the reanimation half of the combo.
It is hilarious to me that you would think Persist with Dreadhorde Arcanist, that would be a substantial downgrade in power, where if your Arcanist has 0 power, it's not going to be returning anything. But in this deck, it returns everything you could possibly hope for.
Yeah, I'm kind of sad that we don't have a way to increase the power of our Dreadhorde Arcanist so we can flashback Electro Dominance to cast these from our hand.
Or flashback the Wear Tear as well, yeah.
That doesn't work, right? Because Wear Tear has a mana value of 3 in the graveyard and stuff gets real weird.
That's what I mean. We need to pump it up somehow. I guess.
Oh, even further. Oh, well.
Oh, okay. Hear me out here. What if we have a 1 copy of Claim Fame in our deck? So we could unmark Grave for that, and then cast Fame on our Arcanist, which could then flash back the Grave or the... Yeah, I think we're doing it. I think I solved it.
Okay. I thought you were going to suggest like you somehow unmark Grave the same one twice and perform a like negative underflow error, and I was going to say that doesn't quite work.
Doesn't work yet, we'll solve that and get to work there. But so this is I don't know if this is typical nonsense you'd expect from Michael Majors, but way more where that came from in his article on SUG this week, where you get to take a tour of his weird and wonderful mind.
Yeah, I will say if you do want to play this Mardu deck, you should change as many of those polluted deltas to marsh flats as you can. There is a plains in the sideboard, and like have some respect.
And you can't even say, oh, these are the ones I had on my account, or your mana traders didn't come through for me, or whatever. This is one of the Wizards employee god accounts. They have everything they could possibly ask for. So come on, Andrew, what are we doing here?
Just default deck building, just default deck building.
To be fair, Polluted Delta historically has been a much more successful land than Marshlands. But come on, let's look at the let's look at the context here.
Yeah, and if you can play with the Onslaught Art Polluted Delta, that might be an excuse in and of itself.
Yes, I guess now you can play with old frame Marshlands from MH2, so even that is not a unique selling point these days.
Yeah, I don't know. It's the whole ensemble, Marsh Flats is Marsh Flats, but original Polluted Delta. Ooh, I guess this Marsh Flats does look really nice. Maybe change the plans.
Sure. So a lot to unpack, I think, is the phrase that usually gets used here with this deck. And so if you want to see more of what Michael Majors has concocted up, then you can do that over on SUG this week. You can find pieces from us as well as various other writers unpacking the impact of the set on modern and other formats too, as well as the latest developments in historic, standard, and so much more besides. In the meantime, before people do that, where can they be finding you?
I am at ARMLX on Twitter, and aside from that, my Star City articles, I'm ARMLX on Magic Online, Arena, I don't know, basically all the places you would expect to find me.
You can find me on Twitter at Dominaria, and by all means, if you want to add to my ever-growing queue that will never be fully depleted of lists that I need to run through a league, if you have the source, then hit me up, let me know. But until then, until next week, we'll see all of you again soon. Take care, everyone.